Greetings to you. My name is Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 8. And the topic this week is the most common corrections made to a PhD through a doctoral examination process. Ooh, and yes, this one also comes via request from an email from the wonderful Mick. Mick is in the final year of his PhD and he's going to complete that PhD in 3 years. So good one, Mick. So that adds a bit of juice to the question this week. So what did Mick ask? Well, in an email he said, Tara, what are corrections? More specifically, what are the most common corrections that doctoral candidates are apt, great word Mick, apt to run into, and how can we avoid encountering them? End of quote. This is a fantastic question, and the research that I've done for you this week, Mick, has come from higher degrees research, very specialist doctoral studies at the moment. It's also come from a survey of international regulations and also the experience and expertise of reading thousands upon thousands of doctoral examination reports, from the high humanities right the way through to the sciences. And I've been incredibly lucky through my career because a lot of universities have a central higher degrees committee, often called the Star Chamber, that has representatives from all the different faculties and schools through the university, and that Star Chamber gets together and assesses the examination reports and what final grading will be given. So it's a fascinating committee, and what committees like that often demonstrate to me is the nature of the wizardry of doctoral examination, and also that really a lot of doctoral examination tends to be a bit of a dark art. So I'm going to pull the curtain back this week and I'm going to share with you the dark arts of doctoral examination. Are you ready? Good. But of course, first we've got the fantastic shout-outs. First shout-out is to the lovely Laurie, who is my British Columbia correspondent, who I hear from about once a week. She is fantastic. Love to hear from you from BC, my love. You are fantastic, and congratulations on submitting that thesis. I am proud of you. The university is proud of you. Really well done. I also want to say a good on Bruce. Bruce, that email was amazing, applying our vlog last week. Incredible. So thank you so much for sending that to me. And what a scholar you are, good sir. I also want to say a big hello to Julie. Julie sent me this wonderful card. She came in and we had a wonderful chat, and she sent me this card that I'm going to keep for the rest of my life. It is a beautiful, beautiful object, Julie, and you are a stellar human being. It is lovely to spend time with you. And speaking of stellar human beings, I need to say hello to Samantha. I had a fantastic session with Samantha this week, and Samantha, I just hope you know every morning I wake up, I think how fantastic you are, and I know that the future of higher education is in your hands, and it is in good hands. So my respect to you and my respect to your wonderful mother. And also I need to do a shout out to my student Sunny. Some of you know Sunny has just left Bathurst and come to join us in Adelaide this week. So if you see Sunny around and about, if you can say hello. But Sunny, we're so proud of you, and welcome to Adelaide, darling. It's a fun place, eh? So let's get into Mick's first question. Now the first question was a ripper. What are corrections? Now, Mick, why that's so incredibly brilliant is we use the phrases, you know, past with corrections, past without corrections all the time. And yet, do we actually all agree what we mean when we use that phrasing? So really clever question, mate. So when we use the phrases past with correction, past without correction, what we're describing is how a thesis is graded. You see, a PhD isn't graded like other coursework or other assignments you might do on the way through in a university. We don't have the HD, the D, the credit, the pass. We don't have the first class, the second class, the third. Doctorates are evaluated in bands, in layers, if you will. And there certainly is some difference between universities around the world, let alone in the same nation, but mostly there is consensus about what is in those bands. So I'll go through them with you today. Now the first band is passed without correction. Passed without correction, it's pretty clear what it means. It's also incredibly rare. Passed with minor corrections is the next one down on the band, and that is incredibly common. Passed with major corrections is the next one down, and again that is also incredibly common. So we've got the first three all going well. Now we're going what's often referred to as below the line, and I'll explain why that matters shortly. So we then go below the line. And when we get below the line, we start to see the banding referring to language like restructuring of the thesis, new data required, a master's given rather than a PhD, and unfortunately at the base, a fail. Right, so that's the layer or the banding. The intricacy of this system becomes even more complicated when 2 examiners in the Flinders system or 3 examiners in many other systems around the world have different results. So there's a minor correction and a major correction, a straight through with a restructuring. You can think about it, all sorts of combinations happen. Now when those combinations emerge, that's referred to as a, quote, split decision. Split decision. Now, universities around the world handle split decisions quite differently. Some universities, as we've talked about, have that top-line governance committee with representatives from around the faculties in a university. They meet, they read all the reports, they discuss it, and they make a determination. Right, so that's one model. Another model which Flinders uses is an arbitrator. So for example, there's a split decision and the thesis and the reports are sent out to another party, another great scholar, to assess the entire story. What's happening with the theses, what's happening with the reports. That's a great model too. Another model is, right, well, we need another examiner, so actually the thesis is sent out again to a 3rd or 4th examiner to see if we can break up that split decision a little bit, yep? But the first thing I would say to you is don't panic, take a breath, everything's great. The overwhelming majority of examinations are returned with the minor correction or major correction, or if we're very lucky, straight through. But the combination of those 3, that is the most common, right? So Mick, as you can see, when we talk about corrections, that's the scale of the work that is required to get the thesis through to graduation. If you like, using the phrase corrections, major, minor, is a proxy for time. So minor corrections can be done quickly and the student can go to examination. Major corrections take a little bit longer. Now I'll do a completely separate vlog, guys, on how to speed up the corrections so you can get to graduation. That's a big issue in itself and important. But Mick, that'll give you a sense about when we're using corrections, what it means for us as supervisors, for us as examiners, for you as students, and also for institutions. Right, first bit of the question, first bit of homework done. Now Mick, your second part of the question asked about the most common corrections so that my wonderful students out there can avoid them. Now I've done my homework for you, Mick. There are repeat offenders, and so what I've done is I've constructed the 10 most frequent corrections and issues that emerge in doctoral examination reports. This should be useful. So bottom line, why I've spent this time and why I'm doing this for you guys is if you take my advice on this one, you're going to move from minor corrections to straight through, which is great, no corrections, that's living the dream, hashtag living the dream. But more importantly, the group that I really want to work on are you guys and gals who might have got through with major corrections, and if you just implement what I'm talking about here, we can get you through minor corrections. Makes an incredible difference to your life. I also want to offer one big reminder at the start. Examiners want to pass you. They really do. They come to the examination process with goodwill. They care for you. They wish you well. So what we need to do, what you need to do for us as examiners, is keep us interested, but also keep us comfortable. Don't make us worry that something's going to go wrong. We want it to go fabulously for you. So keep us comfortable that everything's going well. So let me tell you how to do that. The number one correction, the number one area to address is in the bibliography or the reference list. Very important to realise this. The first part of a doctorate that the overwhelming majority of examiners read is your bibliography/reference list. Now, this is a deal breaker. If you're going to fail, you're going to fail in the reading of the bibliography or the reference list. So I know 30 minutes in to reading a doctorate, I know if that person's going to fail or not. 30 minutes in. So what are examiners looking for? We're looking for length, we're looking for depth, and we're looking for breadth. We're looking that you understand the discipline or the paradigm. I'm also looking for a mix of analogue and digital sources. I want to see that your information literacy skills are of a high order, and I also want quality control. I do not want to see any textbooks. If I see blogs, and some areas need blogs because they're emerging areas of research, so you'll swing in some blogs, that's fine, but I'm really looking for refereed scholarship, innovative, cutting edge, you know the field, everything's going well. Now, this is a biggie. When I was in the UK, when I was examining in the UK, what emerged particularly in my final 4 or 5 years of examination in England was I would see students particularly using Sage undergraduate textbooks. You know, that series of textbooks like, you know, Introduction to Semiotics, Introduction to Sociology, Derrida for Beginners. Really? And the problem with the Australian system, guys, is that we at this stage have no oral examination. So in the English system, Scottish and Welsh as well, I could go into an oral examination, and if I saw some textbooks, I could ask a really tough question to assess their level. So I could say, right, well, Homi Bhabha is mentioned in your bibliography. Could you please explain to me how third space is deployed in your configuration of post-coloniality in this thesis? Boom. Okay, but I can ask it and see if the student is at level, right? Now, in the Australian system at the moment, I can't ask that question. There's no oral examination. So I have to assume the level of sources that you've deployed in your bibliography reference list, that's your level of understanding. I can't test it, right? So much for level, that's important. I also want to see correct and consistent referencing. If there are referencing errors in your bibliography, then you are immediately at minor corrections, and I haven't even actually read a word of your text yet. Right? So in some writing that I've done about doctoral education, I've described the bibliography as the canary in the mine of the thesis. The canary in the mine of the thesis. And what I mean by that phrase is, when I read a bibliography, I know if we're in trouble. I also know if the thesis is magnificent. Like that. So any time you spend on your bibliography or reference list is really, really valuable time. Never think, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired, emotional. Will I bother working on my bibliography? Yeah, work on your bibliography. It matters that much. Okay, the first one. The second most common set of corrections we see, and it is a biggie, are the stylistic or the writing errors. So this could be spelling, it could be typographical, it could be phrasing, any sort of formatting, phrasing issue, right? And there is a line, and this is the bit that's incredibly variable between examiners. And I've done a lot of naughty work this week asking mates of mine around the world about this one in particular. Because what is the acceptable number of typos or writing issues that emerge in a doctorate before an examiner moves to minor corrections or major corrections? What's the number? What are we looking for? And the answer is, it's not really clear. There are examiners, often the really inexperienced ones, bless, who list in a table every single typographical, spelling, grammatical error in the entire thesis, page after page after page. That is humiliating for the student, it's humiliating for the supervisor, it is a nightmare to see. We sort of rock if we ever see those sorts of tables, but having said that, don't blame the examiner. If that number of errors were in the script that was sent out to examiners, then, that's the problem. Don't blame the examiner. Those errors were there and they happened to find them, right? So basically about 20 stylistic grammatical errors are sort of okay, and that will be either pretty well straight through or minor corrections. If we start getting more than about 20 in 100,000 words, then we start to move lower into the ranking there. It also means something for examiners. You see, typos or spelling or grammar, stylistic issues are not just stylistic issues. They reveal something else. So just like the bibliography isn't just about the bibliography, it's about whether or not you're working at standard. When we see stylistic errors, we start to think, right, maybe this thesis is a bit rushed. Maybe they didn't quite get enough time, or weren't quite able to get to the standard we require. So when we see the errors in form, in style, we start to think, I wonder if something else is going wrong with this thesis in content because it appears a bit rushed. Okay, so just be aware of that. Spelling is not just about spelling. It gets the examiners a little bit concerned about what else they may find. Okay, right. Third major area of correction. Oh yeah, this is mine. Examiners have to search for the original contribution to knowledge. Remember, examiners want to pass you. We come to the examination process with incredible goodwill. But examiners panic if we're reading your thesis and we can't find the original contribution to knowledge, right? For our masters guys and gals out there, hello. This doesn't matter for you guys. All we require from a master's, and this is high in itself, but we want a really high quality synthesis of already existing literature. A lot of masters have an original contribution to knowledge, by the way. That's a whole other story. But in a doctorate, that's the deal breaker. The difference between a master's and a doctorate, besides length, is really the original contribution to knowledge. The easiest way to pass a PhD, the easiest way to calm your examiners, is to have the second sentence in your abstract reading, quote, "My original contribution to knowledge is." Every single one of my PhD students has as their second sentence in their abstract, "My original contribution to knowledge is," and they present it in one sentence. Then they flesh it out in the introduction. They return to it in every single chapter to say, right, well, this chapter comes from the last chapter, and this is how I'm contributing to my original contribution to knowledge in this chapter. So keep returning to it. And of course, the conclusion, make sure you nail it down. What you've just read is my original contribution to knowledge, which is. So don't leave any question in the examiner's mind. You cannot be too overt. You cannot be too clear. Present it to us on a plate so that we see and relax and know that it's a doctorate. The fourth major area of corrections, and this is a big one, and it's increasingly emerging in the last 3 to 5 years around the world. That is, the thesis is fragmented. It's not really holding together as a piece of scholarship. We've really seen this. I've seen it in so many doctorates I've examined in the last year or so, and when I've been talking about it with international colleagues, this is becoming a concern. And one of the causes of it, of which I think there are many, but one of the causes of it, I think, is a confusion between the production of papers, so publishing, and the production of a PhD. Now, for one moment, I'm not remotely against publishing. If you don't publish, you will never get a job. So publishing from your doctorate is absolutely crucial and wonderful, and all my students have produced remarkable work, and I want you to produce remarkable work. But just remember that a thesis is assessed by very distinctive and clear regulations. So, for example, I read a report last week where the examiner said, right, well, there was a journal article in chapter 3, and I can't really see the link between that chapter and anything else that's happening in the thesis. 4 months ago, in an oral examination in the UK, I asked a question where there was just sort of a random article that was just put in the thesis. And in the oral exam, I asked, right, could you just explain to me what the role is of that article in chapter 5? Very happy to see it in an appendix or to list it, but what is it doing there? And the student replied in the oral exam, oh look, I'd run out of time, my thesis was a bit short, so I thought I'd just put the article in and bulk out the thesis a bit. Oops. So what we're learning here is work on smoothing the relationship between chapters. Again, there's a structural way to do that. In that second paragraph in every chapter, when you're saying my original contribution to knowledge is, this is how this chapter enables that particular original contribution to knowledge. In that chapter, explain to me how what you're doing here links with the previous chapter and is leading to the next. Again, make the spine of the thesis overt and clear. Explain the links. Fragmented theses are problematic theses, and this is the challenging bit where major corrections, some people go, oh look, it doesn't really hold together too well, make it major corrections. But that's where, on a bad day, a student can get a restructuring, so it falls below the line. So make sure the thesis is holding together. The sixth and the seventh most frequent corrections are a short introduction and or a short conclusion. Now these have different causes. You actually very rarely see a short introduction and a short conclusion because they're very different things. A short introduction is the nightmare, the sort of danger Will Robinson danger moment. So when I open up, I see a short introduction and I go, right, this candidate has no real idea of the arc of the argument, the arc of the thesis, no real sense of what we are doing here. Oh no. At its best, guys, if you're wondering, what am I doing in the introduction? Think of it like the first couple of scenes in a film. You're introducing your world, your research world, to your examiner, giving the information that'll help them understand the journey that we're going on, and we don't want it short. We don't want it insipid. We want to have a sense that you have a vista of your research and how it fits into the wider discipline, the wider knowledge system. Now, a short conclusion is also serious, but in a different way. It has different causes from a short intro. For example, a thesis I was examining was heading for a 1, that is an A in the Flinders system, so straight through, passed without corrections. I'd loved it. It was magnificent, rockin' and rollin', oh this is fantastic. Turn to the conclusion. The conclusion was 2 pages. So the space between one page and another, that thesis moved from a 1 or an A to a 3 or a C. Passed with major corrections. And what was the major correction? Write a conclusion. Yep. So short conclusions are often the characteristic of tired candidates. So they wrote the thesis incredibly well, had great energy, but just they ran out of that propulsion, that momentum at the end. So that's why I always try and say to you guys, give me that conclusion. For my guys and gals, come on, you need to give this to me. The conclusion has got to have energy. I know you're tired, but I need the conclusion to show propulsion. Explain to the examiners why they should care. They've just spent 4 days of their life reading this thesis. Why should they give a damn? Why should they care? What have you contributed to knowledge? Why should I care? Now that is what you're doing in the conclusion. Right, issue 8. Now this is particularly for our guys and gals in the sciences and the empirical ends of the social sciences. Oh, and this is a biggie, this is a frightening one. An absolute deal breaker in the examination of doctorates in these disciplines is when the phrase poor science, or even worse, bad science, emerges in these reports. Now, in my career, I've seen bad science used 4 times in reports. It's rare. Poor science is much more common. But when we see bad science, it's rare and it's also devastating. Hundreds of hours are expended trying to sort out what is going on. A whole series of international experts are brought in, independent evaluators, the supervisors are asked really, really complicated, uncomfortable questions. So what I would say to you is the way to stop anything like this ever happening to you, so that your research doesn't end up on the front page of the Australian or the Times, is don't be frightened of errors or problems that emerge during the research. This is really significant, that you actually look, if stuff goes wrong in research all the time. And as I always say to you guys, examiners love it when stuff goes wrong. Oh, we love it, and we love it when you tell us about it in incredible detail. It's just fantastic. So never think that the problems or the errors or the mistakes are an issue. They're tremendous. We love that. 2 of the best theses I've ever examined were like, well, this was a complete disaster. Let me share it with you. My original contribution to knowledge is really don't go here, girlfriend. It's a nightmare. So they're great theses. So please don't, and I'll use the word mask, and that's too harsh. Don't minimise, don't reduce, some of the outcomes and results that perhaps not what you're after. What I would say to you is also, don't just present sort of the ethics discussion as a compliance mechanism. The best doctorates in these fields talk about ethics in a robust and a transparent fashion and explain, right, well, because of the ethics, my research methods went in this particular direction. I couldn't engage with this type of data and data sources, so therefore my interpretation was limited in this way because the ethics clearance allowed and validated this mode of research. Go into detail about how ethics perhaps minimise the methods that you could use. We love that stuff. Don't mask, don't shield, don't minimise. Present with transparency and robustness, and the examiners will reward you for it. I promise you. Issue 9. And this is the equivalent of the bad science or the poor science comment in the humanities. These emerge in the artifact and exegesis theses. These are the practice-led, practice-based, creative-led, creative-based doctorates. This mode of doctorate has the highest failure rate. They also have the highest number of split decisions. My remarkable example of that, and I was on the panel that was handling this particular case, the same thesis received 3 examiners' reports, a 1, so straight through, a 3, major corrections, and a 6, a fail. The same thesis. So here are the reasons that this sort of train wreck happens to these modes of theses. Firstly, candidates completely misunderstand the relationship between the artifact and the exegesis. They spend 3 years making a film, configuring a sculpture, configuring a soundscape. There's so many different examples. Writing a novella is another very common model, and they spend 3 years doing that, and then they spend basically 6 weeks writing their exegesis, from the Greek explanation, not realising that the overwhelming majority of examiners read the exegesis first. And remember, the exegesis is where you confirm the original contribution to knowledge. This is a PhD. We're after an original contribution, not to art, to knowledge. It's different. So remember, a film, a soundscape, a novel, novella is not in itself a PhD. We're not talking about a DCA here, a Doctor of Creative Arts. That's a different party. This is a PhD. So you have to prove, really prove, through your artifact and your exegesis that you've made an original contribution to knowledge. So the errors I have seen as an examiner, and I examine a huge number of these around the world, it's just stunning. So what goes wrong? The exegesis merely retells the narrative of the film or the novel. Yeah, the exegesis, this is the most common one actually, the exegesis overwhelmingly just talks about the how, the method of producing the artifact, rather than the why, the theory of why the object was created. So there's either a confusion between how and why, or just an ignorance, a disengagement with the why, the theory. Also, the exegesis is simply too basic and doesn't connect with wider disciplinary and interdisciplinary research. There's also a confusion over what is the artifact. We see this in theatre and drama doctorates in particular. So what is the examinable artefact? Is it, for example, the theatre production, so the examiners have to be at the production itself, or is it the video of the production? So you need to be very, very clear, what are the parameters of the object, of the artefact? What are the frames around it, right? Very important. The biggest problem I've seen, or this happens all the time, is the assumption that the artefact speaks for itself, that it embodies knowledge, that it embodies creativity, but it is only an object. And remember, we're using the word artefact intentionally. It is not art. You're not being assessed for art. It's an artefact that with the exegesis contributes to knowledge. So, as you can see, very, very big area, and important that we get that right. And a big hi to the guys and gals in this university that are working in that area. I adore you. Let's have a chat. As soon as you're ready, let's have a discussion about this. Okay, the final most common correction involves the overall presentation of the thesis. So since word processing arrived in the late 80s and early 90s, the standard of presentation of doctorates has increased enormously. So if candidates present a doctorate with formatting issues, and I see it all the time, a chapter commences halfway down a page, or the footnotes are all over the place, or a template has been deployed that's created sort of craziness with the contents page, then suddenly minor corrections tumbles into major corrections. This is caused, I think, because the standard of formatting is so high right now. It's not like the old days where people were on a manual typewriter and examiners could forgive that. Formatting issues are really not forgiven anymore. So if your presentation is chaotic, and that's a phrase I've seen repeatedly in examiners' reports in the last little bit, then it is going to impact on your grading. So Mick, I hope that helps. Guys and gals, this is a really important area. Mick did incredibly well, I think, and I hope we're talking through some of the unspoken assumptions about examination. And when I say doctoral examination is a dark art, I really mean it. It's very, very difficult to research because privacy and confidentiality are so important to it. So most supervisors really have only read their own report for their own PhD and their student reports. Very rarely do scholars have the breadth of the experience for that international expertise with examinations, and even further, they probably don't have the expertise beyond their own discipline and beyond their own institution. So the transdisciplinary movement of examination reports is very, very difficult to determine. So therefore it's hard for supervisors to say, what are the standards? What level is expected now? How is examination changing? These are really big questions, and it's very hard for researchers to answer them because the methods and the confidentiality and the ethics is so vexed in this area. So it really is fascinating. Also, I should say, for a lot of our guys and gals who are international, examination does vary between nations, particularly between nations that do and do not have an oral examination. Right now, all New Zealand universities have an oral examination, yay. Bless the Kiwis. So it leaves Australia in a very odd space at the moment because we're one of the few nations on the planet that do not have an oral exam. Now you may be thinking, woo, I don't have an oral exam. Yeah, no oral exam. And I really do get that, and that's great. If that's your thing, that's brilliant. Let me just explain the caveat or the challenge for us not having an oral examination from the perspective of international examiners, shall I? So that means the standard of the script of the Australian PhD is higher. So often I see in the reports that come from British examiners on Australian theses that they want an oral exam. So often do I see the British examiners actually list the questions they would have asked in an oral exam in their written report, or they note a particularly problematic issue that they state, oh look, I would have resolved this in an oral examination, but because there's no oral examination I can't, so therefore I'll just have to sort of leave this issue as assumed or read and just log it at that point. So it gets a bit complicated there. So this means, guys and gals, we really have to care for the look, the shape, the presentation of the Australian doctorate that we send out into the world. It must be immaculate, because international examiners are not going through the process that they expect. So we have to make them really comfortable that they're assessing a script and it's of high quality and they're calm and they're cool and it's fabulous. Brilliant. So this is a really fascinating topic, and as always, if you'd like to talk to me about it, come in and see me. I love seeing you. Whack me an email. We'll talk through it in that way. See you on Skype at any point. But as always, I want you to have a wonderful, successful, brilliant week. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out. Bye.